He saved 2 little girls. Then the millionaire CEO found out they were his daughters. The city lights glowed faintly through the heavy curtain of rain. Richard Lawson gripped the steering wheel of his black luxury car. His tailored suit was immaculate, but his eyes carried exhaustion. He had just left another late-night board meeting. The rain pounded harder, blurring his vision. Windshield wipers struggled to clear the storm. Lightning flashed across the dark highway. Richard exhaled deeply, trying to calm his restless mind. Deals, profits, and numbers swirled endlessly in his thoughts. Yet, beneath his success, there was emptiness, the kind of silence money could never fill. He loosened his tie and leaned back slightly. The road stretched ahead, lonely and wet. A sudden glimmer caught his attention. Headlights, angled, broken, not moving. His heart skipped a beat. He slowed his car, peering through the sheets of rain. There, on the roadside, a vehicle lay crumpled against a tree. Steam hissed from the crushed hood. Glass shards sparkled under the storm. Richard's instinct screamed. Someone was inside. He pulled over, tires screeching against the slick pavement. Rain drenched him the moment he stepped out. He ran toward the wreck, his shoes sinking into mud. The metallic smell of blood mixed with rain in the air. His expensive suit clung to his body, but he didn't care. Through the shattered window, he saw movement. A small hand pressed weakly against the glass. His breath caught. Children. 2 little girls sat trapped inside. One slumped motionless, her head against the seat. The other sobbed uncontrollably, her tiny fists hitting the door. "Help! Please help my sister!" the girl cried. Richard's chest tightened. He yanked at the mangled door. It wouldn't budge. He tried again, pulling with every ounce of strength. The storm roared around him, but he didn't stop. With a final desperate heave, the door creaked open. The frightened girl's eyes met his. Tears streaked down her cheeks. "It's okay. I've got you," Richard whispered. His voice shook, unrecognizable even to himself. He reached in carefully. The crying girl clung to him instantly. He pulled her out into the rain. Her clothes were soaked, her body trembling. Richard set her gently on the grass. "Stay right here, sweetheart. I'll get your sister." The child nodded, whimpering. Richard turned back to the wreck. His eyes locked on the unconscious twin. She was pale, unmoving, her chest rising faintly. Fear gripped him. He leaned inside, glass scratching his arm. He unfastened the tangled seatbelt. Carefully, he lifted her fragile body into his arms. She was cold, too cold. Rain dripped down her lifeless face. "Stay with me," Richard muttered desperately. He carried her out of the wreck. The other twins scrambled toward him. "Is she okay? Please, mister, don't let her die!" Her pleading voice pierced his heart. Richard knelt, holding both girls close. His suit was soaked in blood and rain. For a moment, he felt powerless. But then determination surged. He couldn't let them slip away. He looked around. The road was empty. No sirens, no headlights, just the storm. His car waited nearby, engine humming. "I'll take you to the hospital," he said firmly. The crying twin clutched his sleeve. "Don't leave us!" "I won't," Richard promised, his voice breaking. He scooped them both into his arms. Their small frames felt impossibly light. He ran through the rain, each step heavy with urgency. He opened the back seat of his car. Gently, he laid the unconscious twin across the seat. The other climbed in, holding her sister's hand tightly. Richard slammed the door shut. He rushed around to the driver's seat. His hand shook as he gripped the wheel. Water dripped down his face, mixing with swabou. "Eat." He started the car with trembling fingers. Tires spun, splashing water onto the road. The headlights cut through the storm. "Hold on, little one," he whispered. The sobbing twin looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Please, hurry." Richard nodded, pressing the accelerator. The car roared forward, slicing through the rain. Every second felt like an eternity. The unconscious girl's shallow breaths echoed in his ears. Richard's jaw tightened. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching. But this terrified him to the core. His knuckles turned white against the wheel. He weaved through the slick highway. Streetlights blurred past in streaks of gold. Thunder boomed above, shaking the night. "Stay alive. Stay alive," he murmured. His chest burned with a strange ache. He glanced in the mirror. The little girl stroked her sister's face, whispering softly, "Wake up, please. I need you." Richard's throat tightened. He pressed harder on the gas. His world, money, power, reputation meant nothing now. Only these children mattered. The hospital's glowing red sign finally appeared in the distance. Relief and fear crashed inside him at once. He sped through the storm, desperate to reach help, and so began a night that would change Richard Lawson's life forever. Richard's car screeched to a halt under the glowing hospital lights. Nurses and orderlies rushed out with a gurney, alarmed by the sight. He flung the back door open, rain still pouring down on his back. "Help her! She's not breathing right!" Richard shouted, his voice trembling. The unconscious girl was lifted gently from the car onto the gurney. A team of doctors surrounded her instantly, shouting medical orders. The other twin clung to Richard's arm, refusing to let go. Her small fingers dug into his soaked sleeve. "Please, mister, don't let them take her away from me," she cried. Richard crouched down, meeting her tearful eyes. "They're going to help her, I promise," he whispered. But inside, his chest burned with helplessness. The doctors wheeled the unconscious child down a long corridor. The girl by his side began to sob harder. Richard scooped her up without thinking, carrying her in his arms. Her wet clothes clung to him, but he didn't notice. Every step echoed in the sterile hallway. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and urgency. He followed the team until a nurse blocked his way. "Sir, you can't come inside. Please wait here." Richard froze, tightening his hold on the crying child. "She needs me," he said hoarsely. The nurse's eyes softened but remained firm. "Your presence will only slow them down. Let them work." Reluctantly, Richard stopped, his heart hammering. He sat down on a bench, the little girl still trembling in his lap. Her sobs quieted into hiccups as she buried her face in his chest. His hand moved slowly over her wet hair, trying to comfort her. For once, he had no words of certainty, no power to control the outcome. The seconds dragged like hours. He could hear muffled shouts from inside the emergency room. Machines beeped, carts rattled, doors slammed. The chaos behind those walls was unbearable. Richard clenched his jaw, wishing he could trade places with the child inside. "Please don't let my sister die," the girl whispered suddenly. Her fragile voice pierced deeper than any business betrayal ever had. Richard looked down at her, stunned at the weight of her plea. "She's strong," he said softly, though doubt laced his tone. The girl's hand clutched his tie, holding on as if her life depended on it. He had never felt so responsible for another soul. The storm outside battered the hospital windows. Thunder rumbled like a warning of fate's cruel timing. Richard sat rigid, his expensive watch dripping with rainwater. Time had never moved so painfully slow. A nurse passed by, giving him a brief glance. He wanted to ask, "Is she alive?" But no sound left his lips. His throat felt tight, strangled by fear. The girl in his arms shivered. He removed his jacket, wrapping it around her small shoulders. She looked up at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. The question shattered what little distance remained between them. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it. Minutes dragged into an hour. Richard's thoughts spiraled. Why was he here? Why did fate put him on that road on this night? He had spent years chasing money, yet here he was, helpless before two children. Another nurse rushed past with supplies. Richard's eyes followed desperately, but no answers came. The little girl laid her head on his chest, exhausted from crying. Her tiny breaths warmed his soaked shirt. He stroked her back absent-mindedly, trying to ease her fear, but in truth, he was trying to ease his own. At times he closed his eyes, listening for any sound from the emergency room. Each silence stretched his nerves thinner. He prayed silently, something he hadn't done in years. Please, don't let her die. The world outside his wealth and power meant nothing now. Only this moment mattered. He replayed the girl's plea in his mind. Don't let my sister die. It echoed like a command, like a responsibility carved into his soul. The door to the emergency room swung open suddenly. Richard shot up, clutching the child tighter. A doctor stepped out, adjusting his mask. Richard's voice cracked. How is she? The doctor didn't answer immediately. He scribbled something on a chart, then finally met Richard's gaze. She's critical. We're doing everything we can. Richard's knees weakened at the words. The girl in his arms began to cry again. Please don't let her die, she repeated, softer this time. Richard pressed his forehead against hers. She won't, he said, his voice trembling. I won't let her. The doctor nodded briefly before disappearing back inside. Richard sank back onto the bench, holding the child as though she might vanish too. Hours crept by with no updates. Nurses rushed in and out, carrying supplies, whispering to each other. Richard studied every face, hoping for a sign of hope. None came. His muscles ached from sitting, but he didn't care. He had spent countless nights in boardrooms, but none as torturous as this. The girl eventually fell asleep against him, her tiny fists still gripping his tie. Richard didn't dare move. He stared at the glowing hospital clock across the hall. Each second blinked like a hammer against his heart. The storm finally began to ease outside. But inside, Richard's storm raged stronger than ever. His soaked clothes clung uncomfortably, but he hardly noticed. He couldn't bring himself to leave for dry clothes, food, or even water. Nothing mattered beyond those emergency room doors. His mind conjured images of the unconscious child's pale face. The way her chest had barely risen in his arms haunted him. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting back despair. For once, Richard Lawson, the untouchable CEO, was powerless. And the weight of that powerlessness crushed him. A nurse paused near him, glancing at the sleeping child. She's lucky to have someone by her side, she said softly. Richard swallowed hard, unable to respond. The words felt like a knife of truth. Was he really someone they could depend on? He didn't know, but in this moment, he wanted to be. Another hour passed, each second clawing at his nerves. He rubbed the child's tiny hand gently, whispering silent promises. Your sister's strong. She'll make it. His own voice trembled as he said it. Somewhere deep inside, a bond had begun to form, one he couldn't explain. Richard had walked into this hospital a stranger, but every minute beside these children was changing something within him. And as the night stretched on, he knew leaving their side was no longer an option. The hospital doors burst open as hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Richard lifted his head, weary eyes narrowing. A woman rushed in, her face pale with panic. Her coat was half-buttoned, her hair tangled from the storm. She clutched her bag against her chest as if it were armor. Where are they? My daughters! Where are my girls? She cried. The sound of her voice pierced the quiet waiting area. Richard's heart lurched violently. That voice, he knew it. Slowly he stood, the sleeping child stirring in his arms. The woman's eyes locked on him. For a brief, breathless moment, time froze between them. Richard whispered her name, though it barely escaped his lips. Emma. She stopped in her tracks, stunned. Her face drained of color, as if she had seen a ghost. Richard, she breathed, disbelief and fear tangled together. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. Memories flashed, their college days, her laughter, her hand once warm in his. He had chosen ambition then, leaving her behind. And now, fate had dragged them together in the worst possible way. Emma blinked, trying to steady herself. Her eyes dropped to the child in Richard's arms, Instantly her body trembled. "My baby!" she gasped, reaching forward. Richard carefully handed the girl over. The child stirred and clung to her mother, whispering weakly. "Mama!" Emma kissed her daughter's wet hair, tears spilling freely. "It's all right, sweetheart. Mama's here now." Richard stood frozen, watching the reunion. His chest ached, though he couldn't explain why. Emma's eyes flicked back to him, filled with confusion and dread. "What? What are you doing here?" she asked, voice sharp with nerves. Richard swallowed, his throat dry. "I found them. On the road. The accident." His words caught in his throat. "I brought them here," he finished quietly. Emma stared at him, disbelief swirling in her gaze. Before she could respond, the emergency room doors opened again. A doctor approached, holding a clipboard. His expression was grim, but professional. "Are you the mother?" he asked, looking at Emma. She nodded quickly, clutching her child tighter. "Yes, please tell me she's going to be all right." The doctor adjusted her belt, Ted his glasses. "Your daughter is stable for now, but there's something we need to discuss." Relief washed over Emma, but worry lingered in her eyes. Richard leaned closer, his heart pounding. The doctor glanced at both of them before lowering his voice. "While running tests, we noticed a rare genetic marker in your daughter's blood work." Emma stiffened, her face turning pale. Richard frowned. "What kind of marker?" The doctor's gaze shifted to him. "A rare condition. It's extremely uncommon. Carriers are even rarer." Richard's pulse quickened. He knew what the doctor meant. "I carry that," he said abruptly. Emma's head snapped toward him. The doctor blinked, surprised. "Then that explains it. The match is exact." Silence slammed into the hallway. Richard felt the air sucked out of his lungs. Emma's lips parted, but no words came. He stared at her, searching her eyes for truth. His voice came low, rough. "Emma, tell me, are they—" She looked away, her grip tightening on her daughter. Her silence was louder than words. Richard's world tilted. 1,000 emotions collided inside him. Shock, anger, disbelief, hope. He struggled to breathe, his chest constricted. "You should have told me," he whispered. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't," she said brokenly. "You left, Richard. You chose your world, not mine." His jaw clenched at the reminder of choices he once made, but the image of the unconscious child wouldn't leave his mind. "And these girls, are mine," he demanded, voice shaking. Emma's tears spilled faster. "Yes," she whispered. The word shattered him. Richard stumbled back a step as if struck. His knees nearly gave out beneath the weight of it. The girl in Emma's arms looked up, confused. She reached for him weakly as though sensing something. "Who are you?" she asked in a small voice. Richard's heart cracked. He knelt before her, unable to lie. His voice trembled. "Someone who cares very much." Emma turned her face away, guilt etched in her expression. Richard pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to steady his thoughts. The hospital lights above seemed too bright, almost cruel. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the fragile child between them kept him silent. He stared at Emma, fury and longing warring inside him. "You should have told me," he said again, harsher this time. Emma flinched but didn't respond. The truth already hung heavy in the air. Richard's gaze softened despite himself. His world had been built on control, on certainty. Yet this truth had knocked the foundation out from under him. He looked back toward the emergency doors. His other daughter still lay inside, fighting for life. The weight of fatherhood pressed on him like a storm. He thought of the little girl's plea, "Don't let my sister die." Now he understood why it cut so deep. They weren't just strangers he had saved. They were his daughters, his flesh, his blood, his responsibility. Emma shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his eyes. The silence between them was suffocating. Richard finally sat back down, burying his face in his hands. His mind raced with memories of Emma, of what could have been. If he had chosen differently all those years ago, would he have been there to watch these girls grow up? The regret was unbearable. He lifted his gaze again, locking onto Emma's tear-streaked face. "No matter what happened between us," he said softly, "they're mine too." And in that moment, Richard Lawson's life would never be the same again. The silence between Richard and Emma grew heavier with each second. His words, "They're mine too," still lingered in the air. Emma shifted uncomfortably, holding her daughter tighter. Richard's eyes burned as he searched her face. "I want the truth, Emma. All of it," he demanded. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. Emma lowered her gaze, her lips quivering. She had carried this secret for years, and now it was unraveling. "Yes," she whispered, almost inaudible. Richard leaned forward, needing to hear it clearly. "Say it," he pressed, desperation cracking his tone. Emma's tears spilled freely as she finally confessed. "They're your daughters, Richard, both of them." The words cut through him like a blade. His chest tightened, breath shallow, as reality crashed down. He staggered back, as if the floor itself had tilted. "My daughters," he echoed in disbelief. Emma nodded, unable to look him in the eye. The child in her arms clung to her dress, sensing the tension. Richard pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. Years of boardroom victories, stock surges, and empire building suddenly meant nothing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Emma's hands shook as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Because you chose ambition. You chose power. I couldn't drag you into this life." Richard's jaw clenched, regret flaring in his chest. "You decided for me," he said bitterly. Emma flinched, her guilt visible in every tear. "I thought I was protecting them," she whispered. Richard's voice rose despite himself. "Protecting them from what? From their father?" His words echoed through the hallway, sharp and raw. The little girl whimpered, burying her face against Emma. Richard immediately lowered his tone, ashamed of the outburst. He ran a hand down his face, fighting to steady himself. "All this time," he murmured, his voice thick. Images of birthdays, first steps, and bedtime stories he had missed tormented him. He felt robbed of years that could never return. Emma wiped her tears with a trembling hand. "I didn't want them to grow up resenting you for not being here." Richard's heart twisted. "Instead, they grew up not knowing me at all," he whispered. Emma looked at him, her eyes full of pain. "Would you have stayed, Richard, back then? Truly?" The question silenced him. He thought back to the man he was, driven, cold, untouchable, and he knew the truth. "No," he admitted hoarsely. "I probably wouldn't have." The honesty cut them both. Emma closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. Richard's gaze shifted toward the emergency room doors. His other daughter was still fighting for her life behind them. A fresh wave of emotion struck him. Helplessness, fear, longing. He whispered almost to himself, "They're my blood." Emma's shoulders shook as she nodded. "Yes, your daughters. I raised them alone because I had to." Richard's knees weakened, and he sank onto the bench. His hands covered his face as tears burned hot against his palms. He hadn't cried in years, not for failure, not for loss. But this truth tore him open. The child peeked curiously at him from Emma's embrace. "Why are you sad?" she asked in a small voice. Richard forced a broken smile through his tears. "Because I just realized how much I've missed." Emma's lips trembled, her own guilt deepening. For the first time in years, Richard felt stripped of his armor. His wealth, his title, his empire, none of it mattered. Only two little girls mattered now. His legacy was not in business towers or contracts. It was in the small hands that had clutched his sleeve. It was in the frightened whispers begging him not to let go. Richard looked up at Emma again, his eyes red. "I should have been there," he said softly. Emma's tears fell harder. "You weren't ready then. And I didn't want to ruin your life." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't ruin it. You just hid the only part that mattered." The truth sat heavy between them, too vast to undo. Richard's hands curled into fists on his knees. He wanted to scream, to demand the years back, but the fragile child in Emma's arms reminded him he had no time for anger. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing the girl's hand. She looked at him curiously, then didn't pull away. His heart lurched at the simple touch. He whispered, "I'll never leave again. Not now." Emma's eyes flickered with doubt, but also a hint of hope. The storm outside had quieted, but inside him, one raged stronger than ever. He felt stripped bare, vulnerable in a way he hadn't known in decades. The image of his unconscious daughter haunted him, tethering him to this truth. "She has my condition, doesn't she?" he asked Emma quietly. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. That's why the doctors noticed. It's rare. They knew it couldn't be coincidence." Richard's stomach turned. "So every time she struggled, it was because of me." "Don't say that," Emma protested softly. "It's not your fault. It's just something she inherited." Still, guilt sank into him like lead. His empire, his billions, none of it could erase this reality. But maybe it could buy her a chance at better care. He gripped his knees tightly, grounding himself. He looked at Emma with raw intensity. "I can give them everything now. Not just money. Me. Their father." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the crack in his once impenetrable shell. Richard leaned back, tears sliding freely now. "I thought I knew what mattered," he admitted. "But I didn't. Not until tonight." The hallway felt unbearably still, holding the weight of his revelation. Emma brushed her daughter's cheek, avoiding his gaze. "They love stories about their father," she whispered softly. Richard's head snapped up. "Stories?" Emma nodded faintly. "I never told them your name. But I told them, once upon a time, there was a man who loved them, even from far away." Richard's breath caught in his throat. The ache in his chest grew unbearable. He pressed his hand against his heart as if to keep it from breaking apart. "I should have been more than a story," he whispered. Emma closed her eyes, holding back sobs, and for the first time, Richard Lawson, powerful, feared, untouchable, sat shattered by the truth of the family he never knew. The revelation had torn his world apart, but it had also given him the one thing he never thought he'd have again, a chance to love. The hallway lights dimmed as night fell over the hospital. Richard remained in the waiting room, unwilling to leave. His body ached from exhaustion, but his soul wouldn't let him rest. Every beep of the monitors behind those doors tethered him in place. He wasn't the CEO tonight. He was just a father. When the nurse finally allowed him inside, he moved quietly. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked clothing. One twin lay unconscious, fragile beneath the wires and tubes. The other sat curled in a chair, wide-eyed but awake. Richard's heart tightened as he saw her tiny figure shiver. He slipped off his expensive blazer and draped it gently around her shoulders. "Better?" he whispered softly. The girl nodded, clutching the fabric like a blanket. Richard pulled a chair beside her, his eyes drawn to the still form on the bed. Fear stabbed him. Fear of losing a daughter he had just found. He reached for the girl's small hand, and she gave it willingly. "Want me to tell you a story?" he asked. Her eyes flickered with a faint sparkle of curiosity. "Yes," she whispered, her voice fragile. Richard swallowed hard. He hadn't told a bedtime story in his life. But tonight, he would try. Once upon a time, he began slowly, there was a brave little princess. The girl leaned closer, hanging on his words. She was strong, even when storms frightened her. She never gave up. His voice wavered, realizing he was describing his daughters. And one day, he continued, a king realized those princesses were his. He promised he'd never leave again. The girl's eyes softened, as though she understood the unspoken truth. She squeezed his hand gently. Will the princess's sister wake up? She asked. Richard's throat tightened. He bent close, whispering, yes, because Daddy's here now. For the first time, the word Daddy left his lips with meaning. It filled the room with a new warmth. The little girl smiled faintly, holding onto the word like a gift. Richard stayed long after she fell asleep in the chair. He stood, walked to the unconscious twin's bedside, and sat beside her. Machines hummed steadily, each sound a fragile reassurance. He reached for her small hand, cold but still alive. Tears welled as he whispered, I missed so much, but I won't miss another moment. His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. Daddy's here now, he promised softly. His heart cracked open with every word, releasing years of emptiness. For the first time, power and money felt useless. All he wanted was for her to open her eyes and see him. His forehead lowered to the edge of the bed, his grip firm but tender. In the silence, he prayed, not for business deals, not for success, but for the life of his daughter. Take everything I own, he whispered into the still night. Just give me another chance with them. His words carried a desperation no boardroom ever heard. Emma peeked from the doorway, watching silently. She had never seen Richard like this, unguarded, broken, real. Her chest ached with conflicting emotions, guilt, sorrow, hope. Richard didn't notice her. His world was narrowed to two little girls. He read stories aloud from a children's book a nurse found. His deep voice softened, carrying tales of courage and kindness. Even if the unconscious twin couldn't hear, he read anyway. Heroes never give up, he said at the end of one story. His eyes burned, knowing those words were for himself as much as her. Hours slipped by, but Richard never left the bedside. When dawn's first light filtered through the blinds, he was still there. His tie hung loose, his eyes red, his hair disheveled. He looked nothing like the polished CEO the world feared. He looked like a father desperate for his children. Nurses came and went, surprised at his devotion. You should rest, sir, one of them suggested kindly. Richard shook his head firmly. I'll rest when she opens her eyes. The conscious twin stirred awake and looked at him. You stayed? Richard smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. I'll always stay now. Her small face lit up with a smile. That smile pierced through years of emptiness in Richard's soul. Emma finally entered, carrying a cup of coffee for him. She set it down quietly, watching the tenderness in his movements. He glanced at her, eyes heavy with exhaustion but burning with love. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Emma's voice softened. You're already doing it. Richard looked back at his daughters, one asleep, one unconscious. They deserve better than me, he muttered. Emma shook her head, her own tears brimming. They deserve their father. That's all they ever needed. His heart swelled at her words. For years, he had believed love was weakness, but here, love was strength, the only thing keeping him upright. He leaned closer to the unconscious twin, speaking softly again. Daddy's here, sweetheart. You're not alone anymore. Emma covered her mouth, overwhelmed by his sincerity. The conscious twin crawled into his lap, resting her head against his chest. Richard froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her. It was awkward, unpracticed, but real. The sound of her breathing against him filled the hollow places inside. He kissed the top of her head gently. "I love you," he whispered, the words strange but liberating. The girl murmured sleepily, "Love you too, Daddy." Richard closed his eyes, holding her tighter, as if he could protect her from the world. Emma sat in the corner, silent tears streaming down her face. She saw the man she once loved transform before her eyes, not into the ambitious CEO she remembered, but into the father her daughters needed. The hours stretched on, but Richard didn't waver. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered promise deepened the bond. He began to hum softly, a tune he barely remembered from his childhood. The melody led the sterile room with warmth. The conscious twins sighed in contentment, safe in his arms. Richard glanced at the unconscious one again. "Come back to me, princess," he whispered. "Your sister needs you. I need you." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I can't make up for the past, but I'll give you everything now." Emma walked over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up, eyes full of tears, yet steady with determination. "I won't fail them again," he said firmly. Emma nodded silently, knowing he meant it. For the first time, she believed he truly had changed. The CEO mask had fallen away, leaving only a father. His heart, once hardened by greed and ambition, now beat for his daughters. And in that small hospital room, Richard Lawson's world shifted forever. He wasn't chasing wealth anymore. He was discovering love, a love that would redefine who he was and who he wanted to be. The days passed slowly, each one carrying a mixture of fear and hope. Richard barely left the hospital, keeping constant watch over his daughters. Nurses began to smile when they saw him. He had become a fixture in the ward. The once feared CEO was now recognized as a father waiting on love. At last, the moment came when the unconscious twin opened her eyes. Richard was there, his hand already wrapped around hers. Her fragile gaze met his, and his heart nearly burst. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, choking back tears. She blinked slowly, as if trying to understand. The other twin clapped her hands with joy, crying, "She's awake!" Emma rushed to the bedside, tears spilling freely. Richard pulled both of them close, overwhelmed by relief. For the first time, they were together, father, mother, daughters. The storm that had begun this journey now felt like a distant memory. Doctors confirmed the girls would recover fully with care. Richard promised to provide the best care money our and love could buy. No expense would be spared, but more importantly, neither would his time. When the discharge papers were finally signed, Richard felt a weight lift. He carried one daughter in his arms, while the other clutched his hand tightly. Emma walked beside them, her expression soft but uncertain. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds as if blessing their new life. Richard guided them into his sleek car, but this time it wasn't about luxury, it was about family. The drive to his mansion felt different than any drive before. He wasn't returning to an empty house. He was bringing home the laughter that had been missing for decades. The gates of the mansion swung open, welcoming them inside. The towering structure loomed ahead, cold and grand, but Richard knew that would change today. The girls gasped as they entered the massive foyer. Their little voices echoed with awe, bouncing off the marble walls. "It's so big!" one exclaimed, spinning in circles. "Do we live here now?" the other asked, eyes wide. Richard knelt, smiling tenderly. "Yes, this is your home now. Our home." Emma's eyes softened at his words, though her guard remained. The mansion, once filled with silence, soon rang with footsteps and giggles. Toys scattered across the living room where briefcases once sat. Richard sat on the floor in his tailored suit, building blocks with his daughters. The sight would have shocked his business rivals. But to Richard, it felt more natural than any boardroom ever had. He chased them down the long hallways, their laughter echoing like music. Rooms once locked away opened to become playrooms and bedrooms. Walls that once felt empty now bore drawings and crayons. Emma stood in the doorway, silently watching the transformation. For years she had managed alone, but now she wasn't alone anymore. Richard's every action showed he wasn't pretending. His love was raw, real, and desperate to make up for lost time. At night, he tucked them into soft beds with storybooks in hand. Once upon a time, he began again, there were two princesses who found their way home. The girls giggled, correcting him. And they had a daddy too? His heart melted as he kissed their foreheads. After they drifted to sleep, Richard lingered by the door, listening. The quiet breathing of his daughters was more valuable than all his millions. Downstairs, he found Emma waiting in the sitting room. She held a cup of tea, her expression thoughtful. "They're happy," she said softly. Richard nodded, emotion flooding his eyes. "I didn't know happiness could look like this," he admitted. Emma studied him, unsure if she could fully trust this new man, but she couldn't deny the change she had witnessed. Richard wasn't the cold, ruthless man she had once known. He was a father who cherished every moment. "I can't change the past," he confessed, voice trembling, "but I promise you I won't waste this second chance." Emma looked down, her heart warring with old wounds. Yet she saw the sincerity in his eyes. "They need you," she said quietly. Richard reached across the table, not for business, but for connection. "And I need them," he whispered. His words were not strategy, they were truth. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion blossomed with life. Gardens once kept for display became playgrounds. The dining hall that hosted business deals now hosted pancake breakfasts. The staff smiled, delighted by the warmth filling the halls. Richard even cancelled meetings to attend tea parties with plastic cups. Shareholders grumbled, but he didn't care. For once, he wasn't answering to them. He was answering to the little voices calling, "Daddy, come play." His empire could wait, his family could not. Emma saw the effort, the sacrifices, the devotion. Slowly, her guarded heart began to soften. She found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done in years. Richard cherished those laughs almost as much as his daughter's smiles. He realized that true wealth wasn't in the stock market, it was here, in the warmth of his daughter's hugs, in the second chances life rarely gave. One evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, Richard stood on the balcony. His daughters played in the garden below, their laughter carrying in the breeze. Emma joined him quietly, her presence comforting. Richard wrapped an arm around her shoulders, tentative but sincere. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said softly. Emma leaned against him, her resistance melting. "Don't thank me, thank them. They saved you." He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The truth was undeniable. They had saved him from a life of emptiness disguised as success. He finally understood what love truly meant. The mansion glowed with golden light as night fell. Richard felt something he had never known before, peace. No stock exchange could give him this feeling. No deal could rival the sound of his daughter's joy. The man who once chased power now chased bedtime stories. The man who once feared weakness now embraced love. His life, once hollow, was full again. As he watched his daughters twirl in the garden, he whispered a vow. "I won't let go. Not this time." His voice carried into the evening air, steady and true. Emma heard him and smiled through her tears. The girls ran to him, calling out, "Daddy!" He bent down, scooping them into his arms. Their laughter rang out like bells, filling every corner of the estate. Richard's heart swelled, overwhelmed by joy. "You're my greatest treasure," he told them, holding tight. They giggled, kissing his cheeks. Emma watched, her heart no longer heavy with doubt. The family she had once thought impossible was now real. Richard Lawson, the ruthless CEO, had been reborn, not through wealth, not through power, but through love. And this time, he would never let it slip away.